Imagine waking up to a knock on your door and being told you have 24 hours to leave everything behind. Not because you committed a crime, not because you're a spy, but simply because of the faith you practice. This wasn't a scene from the Dark Ages or a distant foreign land. This happened in the United States, in the middle of the Civil War, under the command of one of America's greatest heroes. This is the story of General Orders No. 11, the most sweeping act of state-sponsored anti-Semitism in American history, and the psychological battle that followed. It's the story of a general blinded by the pressures of war, and a humble banker who refused to be a victim. But more than that, it's an exploration of how high-stakes stress can trigger our deepest biases, and how one man's courage can force a nation to look in the mirror. In the winter of 1862, the Civil War was not going well for the Union. Ulysses S. Grant, the man who would eventually lead the North to victory, was feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was stuck in the mud of northern Mississippi and western Tennessee, trying to figure out how to take Vicksburg, the Confederate stronghold on the river. But Grant wasn't just fighting the Confederate Army. He was fighting a shadow war against a thriving black market. Cotton was the white gold of the 19th century, and despite the war, people were desperate to move it. Smugglers, speculators, and even some of Grant's own officers were caught up in an illegal trade that was funneling money back into the Southern cause. Grant was frustrated, exhausted, and looking for someone to blame. When we are under extreme pressure, our brains often look for cognitive shortcuts. Instead of addressing the complex, multi-layered reasons for a problem, we look for a single, identifiable group to scapegoat. Psychologically, this is known as the out-group homogeneity effect. It's a bias where we perceive members of an outside group as all being the same, usually in a negative light, while seeing our own group as diverse and complex. Grant fell into this trap. He convinced himself that the illegal cotton trade was being run entirely by Jewish traders. There was no data to support this. In fact, many of the speculators were well-connected northern businessmen and even members of Grant's own family, but his mind had made its decision. On December 17, 1862, he issued the order. The Jews, as a class, violating every regulation of trade, are hereby expelled from the department within 24 hours. Take a moment to let that sink in. As a class. This wasn't an order to arrest specific smugglers. It was an order to purge every Jewish man, woman, and child from a territory that spanned 4 states. It was a logistical nightmare and a moral catastrophe. Families were forced out of their homes in the middle of winter. Elderly people, children, and pregnant women were given hours to pack what they could carry and head into the cold. But in the small town of Paducah, Kentucky, there was a man named Caesar Cascal. Cascal was a banker and a prominent member of the local Jewish community. When the order arrived in Paducah, he didn't just pack his bags. He realized that this wasn't just a logistical problem. It was a psychological and constitutional crisis. Cascal knew that if he followed the order silently, the precedent would be set. He understood the psychology of power. If you don't challenge an unjust authority immediately, that authority becomes the new normal. While many were fleeing in panic, Cascal organized a group of local leaders. They drafted a telegram and sent it to the White House, but Cascal didn't stop there. He knew a telegram could be ignored. He needed a face-to-face confrontation. He needed to break the psychological distance between the decision-makers in Washington and the victims in the field. He boarded a train and headed straight for the Capitol, carrying with him the weight of thousands of displaced families. While Cascal was on that train, the psychological ripple effects of the order were spreading. Military officers who had lived and worked alongside Jewish neighbors for years were suddenly forced to treat them as enemies. This created a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. These soldiers knew their neighbors were loyal Unionists, but they were bound by military discipline to obey Grant. Some officers carried out the order with brutal efficiency. Others delayed, hoping it was a mistake. This is the danger of top-down bias. It forces individuals to suppress their own moral compass in favor of institutional obedience. When Cascal arrived in Washington, he managed to secure a meeting with President Abraham Lincoln through the help of an influential congressman. Think about the psychological courage this took. Cascal was an immigrant, a member of a marginalized group, and he was walking into the office of the most powerful man in the world to complain about the nation's most successful general. He was gambling everything on the idea that the American promise of equality was more than just words on a page. When Cascal was finally ushered into the Oval Office, Lincoln was calm. He hadn't yet seen the full text of Grant's order.
Cascal didn't start with an angry rant. He spoke with the quiet dignity of someone who knows they are right. He presented the facts. He told the president about the families in Paducah who were loyal to the Union, whose sons were fighting in the Union Army, and who were now being treated like criminals. Lincoln, a man known for his deep psychological empathy, listened intently. In a moment that has become legendary, Lincoln famously asked, "And so the children of Israel were driven from the happy land of Canaan?" Cascal replied, "Yes, and that is why we have come unto Father Abraham's bosom, asking for protection." Lincoln's reaction was immediate. He didn't care about Grant's military record in that moment. He understood that the order violated the very essence of why the North was fighting. He recognized that you cannot defend a union by excluding the people who make it up. He immediately sent a message to General Henry Halleck, ordering him to tell Grant to rescind the order. The reversal was as swift as the initial decree. Within days, the expulsion was halted, but the psychological scars remained. Why does this story matter to us today? Because it highlights the precarious nature of civil liberties during times of fear. We like to think of progress as a straight line, but history shows it's more of a tug-of-war between our highest ideals and our lowest psychological impulses. Grant wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He was a man under pressure who allowed a pre-existing bias to dictate his actions. This is a trap that any of us can fall into. When we feel threatened, our brains crave simplicity. We want a clear enemy. We want someone to blame for our frustrations. If we aren't careful, we can find ourselves justifying the unjustifiable just to feel a sense of control. But the most fascinating part of this story isn't just the order or its reversal. It's what happened to Ulysses S. Grant afterward. Psychologically, people usually react to being corrected in one of two ways. They become defensive and double down, or they reflect and change. Grant chose the latter. The backlash from General Orders No. 11 haunted him for the rest of his life. It became a psychological turning point for him. During his 1868 presidential campaign, he was forced to address it publicly, expressing deep regret and stating that he had no prejudice against any sect or race. But Grant didn't just apologize with words. He spent his presidency making amends. He appointed more Jewish people to government positions than any president before him. He spoke out against the persecution of Jews in Europe, specifically in Romania and Russia, making it a point of American foreign policy. He even became the first U.S. president to attend the dedication of a synagogue. This is a powerful lesson in the psychology of redemption. Grant recognized his error, felt the weight of his shame, and used it as fuel to become a champion for the very people he had once tried to expel. He transformed from a man who used a group as a scapegoat into a leader who saw them as an integral part of the American fabric. Cesar Cascal's role in this is equally important. He represents the psychology of the upstander. Most people, when faced with systemic injustice, feel small and powerless. They wait for someone else to act. But Cascal understood that the only way to break a cycle of bias is through direct, peaceful confrontation. He didn't use violence. He used the law and the principles of the nation to hold power accountable. He forced the president to choose between a general's whim and the Constitution. As we look back on this chapter of history, it serves as a reminder to check our own biases, especially when we are stressed or afraid. Who are we blaming for the complexities in our lives? Are we looking for scapegoats or are we looking for solutions? And when we see an injustice, do we have the courage of a Cesar Cascal to stand up and say, "This is not who we are"? History is not just a collection of dates and battles. It is a mirror of the human mind. The conflict between Grant and Cascal was a conflict between the psychology of fear and the psychology of justice. Fortunately for the Union, justice won that day. But the battle is never truly over. It continues every time we are forced to decide whether we will be governed by our prejudices or by our principles. If you found this exploration of history and psychology valuable, consider how these lessons apply to the world around you today. Understanding our past is the only way to build a more resilient and empathetic future. Make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories that shaped our world, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new perspective. What do you think is the most effective way to combat group bias in high-pressure situations? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.